My mail kept disappearing, bills were left unpaid, and personal letters vanished, turning my peaceful suburban life into a daily nightmare. Carol Henderson, our overbearing HOA president, seemed to thrive on control and manipulation, treating my privacy like a game for her amusement. But when I cleverly set a confidential HOA report with a hidden camera and GPS, I finally caught her in the act and turned the tables. Just wait to see how the community rallied. Carol's authority crumbled and justice finally restored peace to our neighborhood. I never imagined that moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood would turn into a daily exercise in frustration. On the surface, Willow Creek seemed perfect. Manicured lawns, friendly neighbors, and tree-lined streets that gave the illusion of calm and safety. My wife Laura and I had dreamed of this life for years, a place where we could escape the chaos of the city and finally settle down. But reality quickly shattered that vision. What began as a minor inconvenience, a missing package here, a misdelivered letter there, soon escalated into something far more invasive and infuriating. Almost daily I discovered that my mail, sometimes containing personal letters, bills, or even official documents, had vanished. At first I assumed it was a simple delivery error, or that a neighbor had innocently picked up something by mistake. But as the pattern continued, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Someone was deliberately taking my mail. It didn't take long to realize who the culprit was. Carol Henderson, our homeowners association president, the woman everyone in the neighborhood privately referred to as HOA Karen, had a reputation for being overbearing. On the surface, she presented herself as a helpful, community-minded leader, always offering unsolicited advice about landscaping, mailbox maintenance, or neighborhood etiquette. But behind that carefully constructed veneer was someone who thrived on control and wielded authority like a weapon. I had caught her multiple times giving me that little smug smile whenever she strolled past my house. One of those looks that made it clear she believed rules didn't apply to her, and that she could bend circumstances to her advantage. I felt a mix of shock and anger the first time I suspected her. At first it was disbelief. Surely no one would be brazen enough to tamper with someone else's private correspondence in broad daylight, under the nose of the entire neighborhood. But each missing envelope, each delayed or lost bill added fuel to the fire. My blood began to boil when I imagined her hands rifling through my letters, her curiosity or sense of entitlement driving her to invade my life. She wasn't just taking mail, she was disrespecting the very trust and sense of security that comes with living in your own home. Rumors about Carol's personality only made the situation more infuriating. Neighbors whispered about her obsession with control, how she loved to play the role of judge and jury, and how she often overstepped boundaries under the guise of community welfare. Some joked that she had a checklist for everyone's house, marking down perceived infractions and handing out quiet punishments for imagined misbehaviors. While I initially tried to shrug off these stories as typical small-town gossip, my own experience proved otherwise. Her actions weren't random. They were targeted, intentional, and personal. The thought that she might take satisfaction in disrupting my life was unbearable. Every day, opening the mailbox became a test of patience and resolve. I would shuffle through the remaining envelopes, mentally calculating what might have been taken. My utility bills, credit card statements, official correspondence, invitations from friends and family. Each missing item was a reminder that my privacy had been invaded. Every time I confronted the empty space where something important should have been, a surge of indignation washed over me. How could someone live next door and treat neighbors' lives as entertainment, as if their personal affairs were nothing more than a game to manipulate and control? It wasn't just frustration, it was a sense of violation, of being singled out and powerless in my own home. The anger simmered quietly at first, a low burn of irritation. But as the days passed and the incidents multiplied, it grew into something more potent. I was no longer just annoyed. I was enraged. I wanted answers. I wanted accountability. Most of all, I wanted to send a clear message that this behavior, this brazen violation of personal space and trust, was unacceptable. In those early days, I felt trapped in a cycle of disbelief and fury. The very neighborhood that was supposed to be a refuge had become a battlefield with Carol Henderson at the center of it. And while I knew I needed to handle the situation carefully, to gather proof and act wisely, the raw, uncontrollable emotion of anger was the first thing I had to confront. It was the spark that would drive everything that came next: the plan, the confrontation, and ultimately the reclamation of my home and peace of mind. After the initial shock and anger faded, I tried to approach the situation rationally. I reminded myself that this was a suburban neighborhood, not a scene from a crime drama. Surely there had to be a reasonable explanation for my disappearing mail. Maybe the postal service had made a mistake. Perhaps a neighbor had accidentally picked up a package meant for someone else. With that thought in mind, I started small. I asked a few neighbors casually if they had seen any stray letters or packages. I even went door to door, trying to sound polite and non-accusatory, hoping that someone had simply picked up something by mistake and would return it. Most smiled awkwardly, offering vague apologies, but no one had any real information. Deep down, I sensed the truth, but I clung to the hope that I was wrong, that maybe this wasn't personal. When that didn't yield results, I decided to take a more practical step. I installed a small, discreet camera outside my mailbox. It was hardly high-tech, just a motion-activated device that could capture anyone who approached. I positioned it carefully, hoping to catch a glimpse of the culprit without alerting them. I even posted a polite, inconspicuous notice on my mailbox. Please leave all mail and packages for the intended recipient. Thank you. I wanted to appeal to reason before escalation. I thought maybe, just maybe, a reminder of common decency would be enough to stop the theft. But Carol Henderson, HOA Karen, did not stop. In fact, she seemed to escalate her behavior, almost as if she were daring me to catch her in the act. The day it truly hit me was one ordinary Wednesday morning. I had barely stepped outside with my coffee when I noticed the mailbox. My heart sank. The lock was torn off, hanging loosely, the metal bent in a way that spoke of deliberate force. I crouched and looked inside, and my stomach dropped. Personal checks, a newly issued credit card, and a few envelopes containing bills and sensitive documents were gone. My first reaction was disbelief. This wasn't just petty theft, it felt like an invasion, a violation of my personal space that left me shaken. I felt powerless in a way I hadn't anticipated. For weeks, the uncertainty had gnawed at me. But this was different. This was tangible. My privacy, my sense of safety had been shredded in front of me. Every important piece of mail I had trusted to my own mailbox was now missing, and worse, it had been taken deliberately. I imagined Carol walking away with it, smiling that same smug, self-satisfied grin she always wore, as if this were some kind of game to her. The thought made my blood boil anew, but beneath the anger a heavier emotion settled in. Despair. How could someone be so brazen? How could they disregard the law, common decency, and the very trust that holds a neighborhood together? Friends suggested confronting her directly. Go talk to her, they said. Set boundaries. Make it clear that what she's doing is unacceptable. But I hesitated. Confrontation could turn into spectacle. Carol had a knack for twisting situations to her advantage. I imagined her accusing me of paranoia, turning the entire HOA meeting into a scene where I looked unstable while she played the victim. It was a risk I couldn't take, not without proof, and so I held my tongue, my frustration growing like a storm behind my ribs. Every stolen letter, every missing package became a symbol of something larger. My security, my life, my dignity being toyed with. The anxiety settled into a constant presence. I lay awake at night, imagining her hands rifling through my personal correspondence, her curiosity feeding her sense of superiority. Morning after morning, I approached the mailbox with a mixture of dread and determination, never knowing what would be gone next. Simple tasks like paying bills or checking bank statements became exercises in vigilance, each day carrying the fear of discovery that someone had been inside my private life. The tension gnawed at me. Sleep became restless, fragmented by anxious thoughts of what might be missing. What could be compromised, and what Carol's next move might be. Anger still simmered under the surface, but it was now laced with an uneasy helplessness. I realized this wasn't just about stolen mail anymore. It was about reclaiming a sense of control, security, and respect in a space that was supposed to be safe. That realization, bitter and heavy, marked the beginning of something bigger. I couldn't let it continue, no matter how careful or patient I needed to be. The pain of this violation would be the catalyst for my next steps. The frustration and anxiety had been building for weeks, almost to a breaking point, when I realized that waiting for justice to come to me wasn't enough. If Carol Henderson, the self-appointed ruler of our little suburban world, wanted to play games, then I would play along, but carefully. The thought gave me a strange mix of excitement and nervous energy. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of control. I wouldn't confront her blindly, and I wouldn't give her a chance to twist the situation. Instead, I decided to outsmart her using patience, strategy, and evidence that could not be disputed. My plan began with a single ordinary-looking package. To anyone passing by, it appeared to be just another delivery. A medium-sized box with plain brown wrapping labeled innocuously as confidential HOA report. The label was no accident. I knew Carol's obsession with power and gossip. Any hint that there might be sensitive information about the HOA would be irresistible to her. Inside the box, I placed a small hidden camera, carefully concealed so it would capture her every move without detection. I also embedded a tiny GPS tracker, ensuring that I could follow the package's journey if she attempted to remove it entirely from the property. I spent the rest of the day waiting, keeping myself busy with household chores, but always with one eye on the mailbox. Hours passed slowly, each one stretching longer than the last. Then, just as the late afternoon sun began to cast long shadows across the street, I saw her. Carol Henderson approached my house, her posture the same as always. Confident, self-assured, almost regal in the way she carried herself. That smug little smirk, the one that had tormented me for weeks, was firmly in place. My heart pounded. This was the moment I had been preparing for. I watched from behind the living room curtain, holding my breath. She stopped in front of the mailbox and without hesitation opened it. The camera captured every detail, her hands rifling through the package, the way her eyes widened as she read the label, the brief flicker of excitement that passed across her face. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind, imagining the sense of authority and control she felt at discovering what she thought were private HOA documents. But of course, the contents were fake, carefully arranged to pique her curiosity and nothing more. I didn't need her to take anything, just to reveal her actions clearly and undeniably. By the time I dialed the local authorities, my pulse was racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The footage was already saving me from confrontation. And yet I couldn't resist one final move. Before the officers arrived, I stepped outside, package in hand, and approached her calmly. She froze mid-motion, the color draining from her face as she registered my presence. Her smirk disappeared, replaced by a mixture of shock and apprehension. I held up my phone showing her the footage. The undeniable evidence of her actions played on the screen, her own hands betraying her as she tried futilely to adjust her expression. Carol didn't speak at first. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, speechless. For the first time, she had no defense, no clever excuse, no ability to manipulate the situation. She was caught, completely exposed and powerless. The weeks of tension, anxiety, and sleepless nights culminated in this single moment. I could see the realization dawn on her face. The game was over, and this time I held all the cards. For me, that sense of empowerment was profound. After weeks of helplessness, I had turned the tables without escalating the situation into unnecessary conflict. I had combined strategy with patience, intelligence with courage, and for the first time hope blossomed where frustration and fear had dominated. I knew that the authorities would take it from here, but more importantly, I had regained a sense of control over my own life, my privacy, and my home. Watching Carol stand there, silent and defeated, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. It wasn't just about catching a thief. It was about reclaiming dignity, proving that persistence and careful planning could overcome even the most intrusive and arrogant opponent. That flicker of hope, born from strategy, calm, and patience, marked the turning point. From this moment forward, I realized that the nightmare could end, and that justice, when paired with careful planning, could finally prevail. The weeks following the incident with the confidential HOA report package passed in a blur of anticipation and cautious relief. I had handed over the footage to the local authorities, and for the first time in what felt like months, I allowed myself to breathe without the constant gnaw of anxiety. Yet even with evidence in hand, I knew the story wasn't truly over. Carol Henderson's influence over the neighborhood ran deeper than her mailbox antics. She had quietly asserted authority over multiple families, enforcing rules arbitrarily and cultivating fear under the guise of community order. For many neighbors, confrontation was unthinkable, but with undeniable proof of her misconduct, the HOA had no choice but to take formal action. The day of the meeting arrived with a mix of tension and anticipation. The community gathered in the small conference room of the HOA office, an atmosphere charged with whispered conversations and nervous glances. Residents who had long endured Carol's controlling behavior seemed relieved that the situation was finally being addressed, while others looked cautiously curious, unsure of how this confrontation might unfold. I took a seat, heart pounding, aware that the outcome was no longer in my hands alone, but in the collective sense of fairness of my neighbors. Carol entered the room with the same air of authority she always carried, though it was noticeably tempered by a flicker of unease. The moment she saw the assembled group, I sensed her confidence waver slightly. The chairperson called the meeting to order, and one by one the details of her repeated mail thefts and boundary violations were laid bare. Each piece of evidence, Video footage, witness statements, and a meticulous record of missing mail was presented with clarity and precision. Carol's initial reaction was one of disbelief, followed by a strained attempt at denial. But as each fact was revealed, her composure faltered. Watching her face as the reality of her actions sank in was a mixture of satisfaction and quiet awe. There was no room left for manipulation or evasion. The community listened intently, and with each nod and murmured agreement, the power dynamic shifted. Carol Henderson, who had thrived on control and intimidation, was confronted by the undeniable truth of her actions and the united response of those she had sought to dominate. By the time the meeting concluded, the decision was clear. She would be removed from her position as HOA president and formally reprimanded for her behavior. The immediate effect for me was profound. I reclaimed not just the stolen mail, but my sense of safety and peace in my own home. Walking down the street, checking my mailbox and opening letters without dread felt like a quiet victory, one that went far beyond the physical items that had been taken. More importantly, neighbors who had endured her quiet tyranny realized that standing up for themselves mattered. The meeting became a turning point, a moment when the community recognized that one person's overreach could be challenged successfully with patience, evidence, and resolve. Seeing Carol mutter excuses and apologies in front of everyone, her authority dismantled and her reputation tarnished, left me with a complex mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in the restoration of justice, certainly, but also a sense of wonder at how a carefully considered plan could overcome arrogance and intimidation. It reinforced a lesson that had become central to my experience. Quiet persistence coupled with strategic action can topple even the most brazen attempts to control and manipulate. In the days that followed, life in the neighborhood gradually returned to its intended rhythm. Families felt freer, children played more openly, and the air of tension that had lingered for months lifted. For me, the triumph went deeper than simply resolving a personal grievance. It reaffirmed faith in fairness, the power of evidence, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Looking back, it became clear that this wasn't just a story about stolen mail. It was a story about respect, community, and the simple, universal right to live without fear of petty tyranny. And for anyone else watching, the lesson was evident. Careful planning, thoughtful action, and steadfast courage can restore balance, protect privacy, and even transform a community for the better. The neighborhood, once overshadowed by one person's sense of control, had found its voice again. And I had learned that justice, when pursued patiently and wisely, could be more powerful than intimidation, more lasting than fear, and ultimately inspiring.